And we'll begin. Hello and welcome to another Sunday. Oh, wait, it's Tuesday. It's a special Superversive live stream. I am your host, Ben Wheeler, running solo with Jim Breyfogle, author of Mongoose and Meerkat, and the subject of a Mongoose and Meerkat Kickstarter. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Oh, I am doing wonderful in this heat, this damnable heat, and I wipe my brow in a theatrical manner. Uh, the it is almost 100 degrees in St. Louis though. That's no joke. But fortunately, I can cool myself down with some awesome pulp literature, like with the Tales of Mongoose and Meerkat, the heat of the chase. It's a
Ah,
Kickstarter. I brought
I
it
did
all the
not
way.
see that one coming.
I am a professional, sir. A professional. I've linked it in the chat for those who want to look at it with us. This is the sequel to the Mongoose and Meerkat Kickstarter that happened a little bit ago, isn't it?
Yes, it is. This is for the second book. The Heat of the Chase is the sequel to Pursuit Without Asking.
Ooh, that is a fantastic name. Let me tell you. And I appreciate those things because sometimes you just don't know. Uh, So, tell us a little bit about the first story and then how it flows into the second and what sort of you're providing in the sequel.
Okay, so the just to take it one step before even that, the Mongoose and Meerkat is it's the nom de plume of kind of an adventuring duo. The Mongoose is the Mongoose and Cat is the Meerkat, and they are kind of the archetype of the second world fantasy adventuring duo. So they team up and they go on adventures, trying to gather usually treasure, but possibly other things as well. And in the very first book, the Pursuit Without Asking, it gathers 5 stories from Kursova magazine together into one volume, and it includes a non-Mongoose and Meerkat story called Deathwater, which we can talk about later if you want to. But it's the beginning, and the beginning is kind of the introductions of how do you do the story is called Battlefield of Karis, and Mangos is a young adventurer who has sort of left his home, and he doesn't even look back, so you don't learn much about it, but you get the sense that he's a little bit too big for the small rural peaceful area that he's from, so he just wants to go out into the wide world and make something of himself. And he starts off the night before we meet him. He's in a tavern, which is one of those fantasy tropes that they tell you never to do because it's been done to death. Is don't start your story in a tavern. Well, I started my story in a tavern because it's
It's
a
a
natural
classic.
place for people. It's a classic, but if you're looking at that sort of society, it's a natural meeting place.
Oh,
And
yeah.
since I'm starting at the beginning where they meet, um, it's a natural place for them to meet. And Mangos has just spent the night drinking and gambling on his own prowess, feats of strength and dexterity and stuff like that. And because he's a pretty capable guy, he won probably more than was good for him, which meant, when you're in a bar betting drinks, you win drinks. And so he kind of had a few too many, and he wakes up the next morning and he has this nagging feeling that he sort of committed himself to something, but he can't remember what it was. And as
Right, right. We've all been there.
yeah, and so as he's trying to sort of sort through the pounding in his head and the knives from the bright lights shining through the windows and figure out what actually went on, there is a young woman who he thinks may have been there last night or not. She looks familiar, and she tells him that he did in fact make a bet, and he was supposed to go find this kind of heroic helm sort of thing. It's one of those helms that belong to a hero and has been lost for 50 years. Nobody knows where it is, and he just kind of bet somebody that he could find it. And he's, he doesn't want to ask her help, although she clearly knows more than he does because he's young and he's big-headed and wants to do it on his own until the guy he made the bet with comes in and, loud voice, because he knows Mangos is hungover and all that sort of thing, and taunts him and kind of challenges him to give up on, yeah, challenges him to give up on the bet. At which point Mangos then, either you can look at it two ways. Either he swallows his pride and asks Cat to help him, or he gets all up in his pride and refuses to back down, so he asks Cat to help him. However you want to interpret it, he ends up asking Cat to help him. And the two of them get together for this one adventure to go to the battlefield of Karis, which is a massive, massive, massive battle that happened over an extended period of time and just kind of destroyed the strength of two countries. And so you can go to the battlefield and you can find or not find all the artifacts that were left over from it. And so they have their adventures, and at the end of it, they find the helm, but they don't successfully recover the helm. But Mangos, it works out for him anyway, and they realize that they actually work well together. And so at the end of the first story, they decide that what they really need to do is team up and go on adventures. And that's the first story kind of sets the tone for, you now have a pair who are inexperienced with each other, but committed to kind of going out and adventuring and hoping that they will find fame and fortune by doing so. So that's the first story. It was published in Kirsova #6. I don't mind giving spoilers for that one because anybody can go back to the magazine or the first volume of the book and they can read it.
Which
When we
they
come down
should do.
Yes, absolutely, they should do. They should do both of those things because you can not only get all the stories together in one book, but if you get the magazine, which is still available in back issues on Amazon, and I don't know if it's available anywhere else, but Amazon at least. There's other stories in the magazine besides just mine that are worth reading. So
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
you can do two things at once by doing that. And then the first book carries them through the rest of the first 5 stories, as I mentioned, which kind of, they're still kind of unfamiliar with each other. And so they have some successes, they have some failures, they have some partial successes. Things don't always turn out the way you think they will, or they think they will. But they do always survive, which because there's a second book.
Oh, spoilers, sir. Spoilers.
Yeah, they survived the first book. The second book is not the Tales of the Mongoose.
Fantastic.
But hopefully by the time, if the readers are following along, they will recognize that they do start to get better at some of these things. So when you get to the second book, you can kind of expect that they're going to succeed more than they fail, and that they're going to be a little bit more confident and competent as they go about these adventures. And one of the things about these stories is because they were first serialized, they are all short stories that are complete in and of themselves. They're not one of those old-time Saturday morning matinee movie things where you have 10 minutes of show and then the hero is about to die and you have stay tuned for the next exciting episode of Captain Dangerous. Will he survive? So if you were to pick up the second volume without the first one and just start reading the stories, you would absolutely understand the stories and it would work out fine for you. You wouldn't feel like you needed to go back to find out something from the second story to understand the fifth story. But having said that, by the time, if people have been following along and they've read in the magazine, they know that at the top of each story is a timestamp, and it's timestamped to an event that happened before Mangos and Cat met, and it puts them in a chronological order. So if you do read them in order, you will recognize that there is a progression. And I've used the example of Mangos's ability to read several times. And since I keep using it, I'm not giving anything away by using it again. Is when the stories start, Mangos can't read. And so if you read them in order, you will recognize that at first he's illiterate, and then he's kind of struggling to read some words on the side of a crate, and then later on you realize that he's actually stealing books out of some guy's library and reading them, and then returning them and stealing another one, treating it like his own private library. And then when you get to further on, it's it's beyond the second book. I think it's in the upcoming issue of Kursova. It's the only story in the series that's written in the first person, but you realize that Mangos has progressed from not being able to read to slightly being able to read to being able to read to now actually writing the story in the first person. So you don't have to read them in order to appreciate the story, because each story is a self-contained story. But if you do read them in order, then you do get to see that progression, and you might be able to pick up some stuff in the background that you wouldn't otherwise.
Sounds absolutely fantastic. I love character development, though I am scandalized that he is stealing books. Terrible. I only hope the person
Well, I
deserves it.
mean, it's the Grain Merchant of Alamar. If the readers, so if you see my avatar on the screen, that's a scene from the Grain Merchant of Alamar, and it's also the cover of the second book. What has happened is they have been hired by the Grain Merchant to steal some information from a rival, and what the Grain Merchant doesn't know is that Mangos and Cat have just shown up in Alamar, which is, big city. You make it in Alamar, you've made it anywhere, and they don't have housing suitable to their what they believe their station should be. So this grain merchant just has a massive mansion that he can't even keep track of. So they've kind of taken up residence in his guest wing, and he doesn't even know it. So they're stealing the books from the library of the grain merchant whose house they're living in, who also happens to be the guy who's hired them for this job. And he absolutely deserves to get his books stolen. I won't give too much away. Let's just say he deserves his books to be stolen, and probably a lot more than that.
Sorry for the noises you heard. I will have to be mollified with for that statement, and it certainly sounds like you've got a pretty good like adventure system going there. I know for a lot of stories, it's like, well, Conan just randomly wanders around roving and whatnot. Well, it's like, no, there's a logic to what Conan does. He shows up there because he's a mercenary. He shows up there because he's a mercenary. He shows up there because he's a pirate currently. And there's actually a pretty clear logic of his character going through the various adventures he does, and then, you know, you can have a timeline. So it's not just randomly showing up somewhere and something happens. I appreciate that there's kind of a logic. Well, it's like, what are they going to do? Well, they're going to hide out in some dude's house because he's a good house, and he doesn't have enough servants to guard it. More fool him.
Yeah, well, and so it's there is kind of um, people have made the comparison with not with Conan, but with Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, if you're familiar with Fritz Kleber.
I am.
He Yeah, so that's I don't want to say it's intentional, because I'm not trying to mimic Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser or anything like that. I am taking some inspiration from the idea of Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, because I enjoy reading those tales, but they are definitely dated. I mean,
Yeah.
there's some stuff that he wrote that you couldn't get away with for good reason in today's marketplace. And so Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, they don't have any purpose. They're just out having adventures, and adventures happen to them. Either they're in the right place at the right time, or they just kind of get bored and go out and seek them. But at the end of Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, they're pretty much, I mean, they've okay, so they kind of have taken up residency in an island kingdom, so they're sort of pseudo authority figures, but not completely. but they don't have any real purpose. They're not that much different from when they started.
Right.
Um,
Just a
the
little bit
idea,
sadder if they even remember what the girl's name was and all that jazz.
yes, yes. But the purpose here, once I kind of wanted to say, okay, so if I wanted to reach a broader audience than Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser would get today, then maybe one of them should be female and that sort of thing, and maybe they shouldn't be horrible people completely and that sort of thing. Um, but as I started to write stories after I got a couple stories into it, I kind of started thinking, well, what if, unlike Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser, I actually have something going on. So there's a purpose behind each story, and there is a purpose behind the stories, insofar as what they're trying to do. I mean, they are kind of adventures and mercenaries for hire. So some of the things they are hired to do, and you just, I mean, you go where the boss says, and you have the adventure that the boss wants you to have when that happens. But there are 18 stories, and there's definitely an end to the story. My original intent for this was to allow people to read the stories, kind of serialized as they are in the magazine, so that they can just read them, and it doesn't matter where somebody comes in. Somebody doesn't feel like, oh, well, this is story number 8 and I haven't read the first 7, so why should I bother? I wanted
Mm,
to write a story that somebody would just pick it up and read the story and say, hey, this is a great story. Are there any more of them?
right. And they're all in this nice
And
little collection too, a handsome collection that you
yeah,
have.
which makes it easy. You can get them in handy book form. And then in the back of my mind, as I'm writing these, I'm thinking, okay, if that were to happen, then the perfect follow up to that would be to be able to bring them all together. So once you've read through them and you actually get to the end, you'd be able to pick them up and read them without having to wait for 2 months or 3 months for the next one. But you could just reread them one after another, and you could see some of the progression that you might not have seen as you were going through. And with new eyes, because you know how it ends, you might be able to recognize some of the text as having subtext into it that you didn't recognize that before, which is very unlike Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser.
Mm. It's yeah. Like I'm not some like deep lore Fafhrd in the Grey Mouser, but their characterizations past the first book never really grabbed on to me. Like might be expected. Uh, but that's all right. That's the stories. Fritz Lieber's a good writer. Um, so clearly we've got some heavy pulp influence. We've got some great stories here. Looks like we have um, 6 stories and a novella, Thunderhead. Is that right?
Yes, yes, and so I had mentioned in the first one that we had the Mongoose and Meerkat stories, and then we had a story called Death Water, which is the non-Mongoose and Meerkat story. And Alex, who's the editor of Kursova, and I talked about that, thinking that if we included something in the book that wasn't in the magazine, then that would give added value. Because if somebody followed the magazine, they might think, why should I buy the book? Because I've already read these, or I've read three of them, or something like that. And
Oh yeah.
we just wanted to give some value to the book, so it would be worth buying rather than just you know sitting on the magazines that you might have. And we've done the same thing in the second book, and this one is Thunderhead, which is not a Mongoose and Meerkat story. It's not related to Deathwater either. I've had a couple people ask if I was going to do something in Deathwater, the Deathwater world, which, I mean, it's kind of them to ask. It means that they enjoyed it enough that they'd like to revisit it. But it's completely different. Hopefully, it's something just as enjoyable, but it's not Deathwater.
Mm. So let's go over what we're offering on the Kickstarter. Certainly not some Guinsu knives. We've got the ebook, we've got the pocketbook, and the trade paperback. I understand the trade paperback is like what you usually get from Amazon. Is that right?
Yes, assuming that they're buying the trade paper. Yes, it's. I don't know the exact measurements, but yeah, the oversized paperback, if that's what they're expecting.
Absolutely. And then we have also a hardcover, which is nice. Uh, I was the first one released in hardcover. I cannot remember.
It was.
Ah,
I don't know. I should know this. I don't. Hardcover may still be available through Lulu, but it is definitely available through this Kickstarter as an add-on if somebody wanted to go back and get a hardcover of the first one too.
I gotcha. And then sort of in all formats where you can like catch up and get some spares to give out to friends, which is always nice. Keep the hardcover for yourself. So we also I see something here about original art. What's up with that?
So, and this is really cool. I mean, as an author, it's really flattering and very cool to see how somebody else interprets your characters. Because I mean, I'm not an artist. I can't draw to save my life. But after a few episodes of the Mongoose and Meerkat came out, somebody approached Alex and kind of you'd have to ask Alice how the verbiage went down and how they connected, but it turned out that this woman was a fan of the stories and had drawn some artwork to go with some of the stories and was interested in doing some more. And so Alex came to me and said, "Is this something that you'd be willing to allow?" And so, of course, it's flattering that somebody likes your characters enough that they would, take the initiative and draw on themselves. So once I had seen what she did, I'm like, yeah, this is kind of cool. If this is something that you think will help, because he wanted to include some stories in the book, and he also wanted to start including some stories in the magazine, and um, that has been very successful. We've gotten a lot of positive feedback for the illustrations that Dark Philly has done. Some of those, you can see some of them on the Kickstarter page, and those add-ons are in the book, but those are also the original art is for sale. So if somebody wanted to buy Dark Philly's original line drawing for whichever story is on there that you happen to like the best, you can do that.
Awesome. That's pretty cool. I know, for myself, it's like hiring an artist, having fans, create little pieces of work around your stories is always fantastic. And you never quite know. It's like, okay, if I'm too friendly, but you want to be super friendly. You just don't want to. You just don't want to maybe base canon on it because you never know when you're randomly then made an icon in the furry community or something ridiculous like that. Uh,
Yeah, you definitely don't want to go there. But fortunately, she's right. She's doing illustrations from the stories that are already written. If she has done anything that has not been in the stories, I haven't seen it.
hmm,
To the best of my knowledge, she's been drawing under contract with Gersova. So Alex will say, we need a story for the golden, or I'm sorry, we need an illustration for the golden pearl, and then
nice.
I assume there's some communication on which scene they want illustrated, but that's not actually part of my decision making.
Well, sure. Fantastic. Let's see here. I do like King's Game. That's a pretty cool one. I do not have the money for it, but I do have the money for a sweet little trade paperback. Uh, so tell me a little bit about the cover art then.
Okay, so one thing I'm just going to jump back just a little bit, because as you're going through there, no matter which one you choose, if somebody wanted the trade paper, the mass market, or the hardcover, it does come with an ebook of the first book. So if somebody were feeling like, yeah, I'd kind of like to do the second one, but I don't want to jump in midstream, um, you'll get a copy, an e-copy of the first book, and if you're into reading on your Kindle or something like that, then you can just sort of catch up that way. Um, and then there's also the add-ons. If I mentioned that they can get an add-on of the hardcover, you can also get an add-on of other formats of the first book as well as when you buy
Hmm.
the second one. Um, and Paths of Core Manor too, which is another book that I've written. It can be done as an add-on for these. But the cover art getting back to the cover art. So one of the things that I think is really cool. So the cover art, this is the third cover illustration that this particular author has done. Anton did a cover for the magazine for the Golden Pearl. He did the cover for the first one for Pursuit Without Asking, and then he did this cover as well. And I mean, he does great stuff. And I don't want to belittle the earlier ones by saying he just keeps getting better. But of the three, I actually think that the one that you see on my avatar here, the one for Heat of the Chase, is my favorite. And what's kind of cool, if you're looking at the Kickstarter page, one of the illustrations that Dark Philly did is the same scene, but it's from the other side of the room. So she's showing as if you're kind of looking in the window over Mongoose and Cat's
Excuse me.
shoulder as the demon is coming through the demon gate. And what Anton's done for the cover here is shown it from behind the demon as this kind of, looking down towards Mongoose and Cat in the window. And I think that's kind of cool. I mean, I always, like I said, it's fascinating to see how someone else will read the words on the page and then visualize them in their art. Because sometimes it can be very similar to what I was thinking, and sometimes maybe there's some significant differences there too.
I like it. Certainly looks dynamic, looks good on the cover, which is more important than a lot of things. And the first cover as well looks pretty good. Characters fighting a giant snake. Absolute
Yeah,
classic.
yeah. That's the Valley of Terzal.
So, let's see. We've covered the Kickstarter. Let's talk a little bit about the stretch goals. So there's something about an audiobook and an RPG bonus content.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So the first book has. Let's go with the first thing, the RPG, because that's set. The second one is still a little bit in the works right now. So both in the first one and in this one of the stretch goals was if we got enough subscribers, Alex would do some role playing content for people, and there is some in the first book because that we made that goal. And this one we've already made the goal, so we can say if you want to use Mangos and Cat as non-player characters, then there's going to be information on how to do that. If you want to take some of the settings or take some of the monsters out of the stories and use them in your um, own scenarios, then there's some statistics and some direction for how you can do that. I've heard that people have been doing that, which I just think is hysterical. Have, I mean, having my characters being used as non-player characters in somebody else's dungeon campaign is actually really awesome to hear. I have I've heard jokingly that Mangos is in fact a bit of a fruit because of his name, and I'm like, yeah, I mean that's hard to argue with that.
Right, right.
Um, but that goal has been met, so that will be included. What we're still reaching for. So the first one, Alex did a little bit of experimentation with the first one and another book that he has published by Amisha Burnett in turning them into audiobooks to see how well received they would be. And the woman who read it, so he got a professional reader to read it, and she did a great job reading Pursuit Without Asking, and her voice of Cat is just spot on. It just sounds really good. And when she's reading Deathwater, her reading of Deathwater is just really good. The problem with it is it's a lot of work to do an audiobook, and so he doesn't want to do it again unless there's enough interest to make it worthwhile. So using the audiobook as an add-on, if enough people add it on, then we will do an audiobook for Heat of the Chase. But if there's not enough interest, then it's just not worth the crazy amount of work that goes into making it happen. So that one's still a little bit up in the air.
Speaking as somebody who does Pinkerton's Ghost, it is an absolute and amazing amount of work. Even if you're deliberately not hitting audible quality, like it's just a lot of work you have to do. Even as an actor or the writer or the editor, whatever you think of yourself. So there's a lot of add-ons with this one.
I'm sorry, what?
So there's a lot of add-ons that one can get once one supports the Kickstarter.
Yeah, and the other one that I just sort of alluded to and said we could come back to, but we haven't yet, so I'll just kind of throw it in here, is last year we came out with a book called Paths of Core Manor. It's not a Mongoose and Meerkat book. It's not related to either Deathwater or Thunderhead. It's just it's its own thing. But it is, one of mine, so it makes a logical extension as an add-on with this Kickstarter. And if somebody missed that one, um, then they can certainly add this book in if they wanted to do that. But Paths of
Mm.
Core Manor is like I said, it's something separate. It's gotten very, very good reviews, and obviously I like it a lot. But I might be a little biased. One never knows. Um, but if somebody wanted to add on another book, and that one has nothing in that book has appeared in the magazine, so readers of the magazine would only be able to get the Paths of Core Manor stories by buying the book.
Mm. Absolutely. Uh, it's not connected, but it's same sort of like fantasy pulpy style.
Yeah, so this one actually, so it's sort of similar but different, if you know what I mean,
Yeah.
because the overall story, and everybody tells authors that you need to have your one sentence elevator pitch in case somebody asks you what your book is about, even though everybody also knows that will absolutely not do justice to your 65,000 word manuscripts. Try to sum
Right.
these 65,000 words up in 8. But
No.
I call it yeah, I call it Swan Maidens Meet Beowulf. And so
Okay.
so there's a group of women who they don't turn into swans, but they actually turn into cormorants, and they make their living by diving in the lake and catching. They're kind of like I don't know what you would compare them to, but they're salmon that have ivory in their heads, and then you can carve the ivory into fancy sort of luxury good things.
So
And
narwhal, but it's no more edible.
yeah, and so this is sort of a magical thing that they can do by transforming, and the prince of the realm, he's a good guy, but he's the seventh son of the seventh son, so he's really far down on the line, and he's kind of overlooked, and so he's allowed to wander around wherever he wants to wander, and he ends up deciding that he wants to see this magic because he's curious. And so he does go and he watches the women transform, and they put on the show so that he understands what's going on. And at the far end of the lake, there's what they call the Grimly, which is kind of like this leftover, I won't don't want to say an elder god or a fairy or something like that, but it's kind of a greater power that is just sort of lurking underwater, kind of like Grendel's mom, actually. And through the course of the afternoon, a child falls into the lake, and the prince goes in and rescues him. And because he's the seventh son of the seventh son, which is, the power child, this Grimly senses him. And the long and the short of it is that the Grimly grabs him, and the youngest Cormorant daughter rescues him. But in the rescuing, one of the powers of the Grimly is to steal somebody's soul. So he steals the soul, and then the youngest Cormorant, Amara, has to go and try and rescue his soul now, because they have his body, but now they need the soul. And a portion of the soul has been torn off of the rest of it and is gone in the Grimly. So when Amara kills the Grimly, she rescues his whole soul, but then that little tiny piece of the soul goes into her. So it went from the Grimly into her. So they restore his soul to him, and now he's up and about doing all that, but she still has a small bit of it in her. And so the rest of the book is how Kellen, who is the prince, needs to somehow find a way to get the rest of his soul back, and how Amara kind of needs to keep it safe until he can do that. And so this one goal, it kind of alternates chapters dealing with either him or her, goes through the entire book, but each chapter is told from a different point of view character. So each chapter has a character who has their own story, and their story is wrapped up in that chapter. Now, Kellen and Amara's story is not. So when you have a story dealing with, maybe Amara's mother, what Amara's mother is dealing with, of course, has something to do with Amara, and Amara is involved in both her mother's story and her own. But at the end of the chapter, her mother's story is wrapped up, but Amara's story continues on into the next chapter where it intersects with somebody else. So you end up having, what is it, 13 chapters? So you have 13 different stories. But unlike Mongoose and Meerkat, where you read one story and it's a completely contained story, and you're not thinking, oh my gosh, I need to read the next story to know how this one ends. Mongoose and Meerkat, you need to read the next story because that's going to be a cool story you want to read. This one, you don't need to read the next story to know how Amara's mother's story ends, but you do need to read the next chapter to see how Amara's story continues.
I get you.
And this one it's definitely a second world fantasy. It has kind of this Scandinavian vibe going on to it. In
Yeah.
conversation on the internet, people talking about it, they tend to want to put it either too far north or too far east, which is fine. I mean, it really doesn't matter. But technically speaking, it would be in that southern strip of Jutland. So the words that are not in Danish are in German. So it's that strip of land just on the Danish-German border there. And it's not technically our world, but if it were our world, that's where it would be.
We're in a different world. How can you tell? I haven't seen a McDonald's in miles. Slap.
Yeah, and this woman puts on a cloak and turns into a bird. That was a little bit of a giveaway too. I don't know.
She could just be a birdkin. We're
Yeah,
progressive here. We're in the furry world, and then you have to explain to a medieval peasant what a furry is. So, like a werewolf?
yeah,
No. Yes.
no, yeah.
Anyway, so it looks like the campaign has been pretty successful so far. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, very pleased with how it's going so far. We still have a little bit of time left. If any of the listeners want to jump in, you have until the end of June. But right off the bat, we got a lot of people up on the first couple of days. Made our initial, for Kickstarter, you say we want to make this much. We covered that in like the first 8 hours. That wasn't a problem. And Kickstarter took notice, made it one of the projects that they love, which again, I mean that's flattering. It's nice that they love us,
It is.
and hopefully, and so that means that we get a little bit more exposure because of that. And after that, I mean, you sort of expect that it's going to sort of taper off a little bit, but we've had a pretty good, you know, um, steady trickle, if you will, of people coming in and supporting us in whatever level that they're supporting us. I think as I talk right now, I think we're at like 3,600 or something like that, and we're hopeful that by getting the word out, we can draw a few more people in because they really are good stories. I think people who are into the kind of speculative fantasy genre hopefully will enjoy it, and we're hoping to get kind of a good strong push toward the end. um, I will say this is not to tell people that they don't need to support the Kickstarter, because for Kursova's interest, it's better for Kursova if somebody supports the Kickstarter, but it will be available after that point. So if somebody, I don't know, maybe they are listening to this podcast in 3 weeks and they do the face palm and say, "Oh, I missed it." Well, it's okay. You'll be able to get a copy once it is truly released rather than through the pre-orders.
I get you. It's not that this is the only way we're going to do it. It's just we need to make sure that products are profitable and whatnot. And it's nice to get some special stuff out there for people, especially
It is.
if anyone's interested in the art or anything like that. Um, let's see here.
Yeah. It, It is. It gives them the opportunity to buy some of the art, and it's also a good thing because if you do it through the Kickstarter, we're not sharing with it with Amazon.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. Uh, yeah, anyway, greedy. It's like that one meme where it's like greedy writers who are trying to make a profit on their books guzzling down profits, and Jeff Bezos is just trying to, get a little thing on the side. It's like, oh please, I'm
Oh yeah,
starving.
Jeff Bezos, who needs all the money.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah, he's so destitute.
the divorce only left him as the second richest man in the world. Don't you know? We're causing him
It's
issues.
Yes, yes, and the meme where he is launching himself into space, literally burning money from Amazon for liftoff.
Hey, he's doing his part to keep down inflation. That's
Right.
important. He's a hero.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yep.
anyway, all right. So we've talked about it. I myself will more than likely pick up the trade paperback to match my previous trade paperback from the first Kickstarter. This Kursova has been releasing some very successful Kickstarters over the years. Um, his most successful one was I can remember it. They went to Saturn, and there's psychic energies, and there's the Prince of what's his name? Oh my goodness, I can't. I can remember this. Kursova, please help me.
The Julian Hawthorne.
Yes, Julian Hawthorne, son of Nathan Hawthorne. Uh, I just can't remember.
Yeah, they've done a couple releases of Julian Hawthorne stuff,
Yeah.
and I'm probably not going to be able to get the right order of them because I'm not going to be able to get the right order of them. But oh crap! And I can see the cover. I will get it in a minute. The
Cosmic
Cosmic
Courtship.
Courtship was
There we go.
that was the first one that they did, and then they did what was it?
His
Uh,
some collection of short
Doris.
stories.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there was three different volumes included in it. Um,
Yeah.
Doris,
Point is,
Doris Dan.
even though our brains are leaving us and I am sweating in my room, the the Cosmic Courtship's quality was absolutely top tier. Very enjoyable. Kursova is a proven backer for Kickstarters everywhere, um, and can certainly be trusted to deliver, which isn't always a guarantee in our world, sadly.
Yeah,
Um,
and
yeah.
okay, I was just going to jump in a little bit on that because Alex he's pretty savvy when it comes to setting the fulfillment date, and I have had somebody mention that the date on this is a little bit far out. Um, and obviously, I can't say that he's gonna beat that time, but he's gonna beat that time. He always does. Um,
Well, let's hope, because we're currently experiencing some kind of apocalypse, at least for the region that we're in.
right.
So if the truckers randomly up and disappear, that's not our fault. Uh,
Right. But I kind of feel like that he's sort of taken that possibility into account. He has a really great track record of making sure that the fulfillment is not just on time, but ahead of time.
oh,
So
absolutely.
if somebody had any question on that whatsoever, I haven't seen any indication that he's had problems with any of his Kickstarters and making fulfillments. And he's had some pretty big ones. I mean, that Cosmic Courtship drew in a lot of people, and
Oh yeah.
he had a lot of work packaging up and sending out the books, and he still managed to get it done in time.
Yep. Which, and that's, like I've said, very important. You want to back projects with proven track records. Uh, as well as take a look at the extra stuff that they've got available. I'm kind of surprised he doesn't just tell me that I can choose the side stuff and the art and whatnot. It's just an add-on. Always find that weird when I see it. It's like there should be a little button that says "Show me the add-ons." Whatever. That's Kickstarter's fault.
It's Kickstarter. Yeah.
Kickstarter. My goodness. Anyway, moving forward. Let's take a look at the comments, and then I'll let you have the final word. I'm also getting off a cold. I swear. I was like getting myself up and was like, oh, cold. I better rest up. Rawl Neonzi. Hello, Rawl. Hello, Fiona Wolf. Hello, Kursova. Looks like they're the main ones in, excuse me, attendance. Rawl Neonzi talks about his short stories concerning Sasha Reed, though there is kind of a plot to them, or a order. Fiona Wolf exclaims, a collection of serials into the form of a book. Excellent. It's the only way people will buy them, says Rawl. Well, yeah, like, I don't really see a lot of Substack or Amazon Vela popularity. Like, I always see people, like, kind of talk about it sometimes, but then you look at it and it's like, you sure this is what people are buying? This isn't worth my time. But I am an elitist. So you know that anything I promote is quality. Let's see here. Raven Monroe is the name of the artist. And Dark Philly, who has been an artist for Kursova, is also doing some stuff going on. Rawl compliments him keeping it moving, which is a thing. Like, it's like having a driven artist or someone who can manage driven artists is a rare touch indeed. I have to bully them. He just kind of like asks them and it's done. It's nice. Compliments the audiobook. Talks about needing 100 people for it. Some compliments for Path of Carminar. And ACX is an awful payout. Yeah, I've heard that. That's unfortunate because it's like the places I have seen audiobooks available on usually has pretty trash stories. Like, it's not really that good. It's either cookie cutter like spy thrillers, or it's like weird sort of steampunk adventure or romantic adventure, that sort of thing, that
Yeah.
leads into a very socially conscious message. What was that?
I was going to say, which is really unfortunate because the people I know who like audiobooks really like audiobooks.
Yep.
I mean, I know some people who they're just like, I just can't sit down and read that long, which is weird to me, but that's what for them. So they want to have it going on in the background, and I know my wife. I mean, when she drives for any length of time, she loves to have that audiobook going on in the background or something like that. So you'd think that maybe it's not as big a market as your physical books, but you'd think it'd be large enough that they'd dedicate some effort to making sure they had quality choices.
Well, it's always truckers and truck stops. Is more or less what I'm talking about. Audible is just whatever they found in the kitchen sink. And sometimes they even put like archive recordings on as audiobooks, and it's like, all right. Kursova helps us. The Cosmic Courtship, Absolute Evil, and a Goth from Boston. Sarah was
There we go.
Judith, Doris dances, and fires rekindled. And then he
There we
says,
go.
on time Kickstarters. And then he's like, he needs the art. He just needs art. That's always an occasion. And Wild
Well,
Star.
I'm glad he's there to fill me in because I was feeling kind of stupid not being able to come up with all those Julian Hawthorne titles off the top of my head.
I would hope that Kursova can, and I'm glad he could. Let's see here. Not crossover between our readers and audiobook readers, I think. Yeah, I actually agree with that. Like, I know Pinkerton's Ghosts isn't hitting some sort of demographic, even though, well, I haven't been paying for advertising, which, is always a problem. But, like, it's not hitting the horrorcore demographic. I know that there isn't an Audible and reader demographic crossover, partly because readers like to read for its own sake, or at least, you know, do what I do and buy books so that you look like you read. Uh, and then just
Yeah.
and then those like Audible stuff like this is gonna sound weird, but you know John C. Wright's Super Luminary. It's a sci-fi versus vampires,
Okay.
but
Okay.
Ralph Pfister did the audio for it, and I swear that is the most superior way to listen to that story or to read that story. Uh, I think it's Ralph Pfister, something. And he does all the voices. He has this gravitas to it that this ridiculous story about fighting space vampires with a kid who can control his own biotech and has turned himself into a 9 foot tall monstrosity that thankfully his mother at least loves, maybe, or at least has conditioned herself to love him because she can control the mind. Um,
Yeah.
it's one of
Uh,
those ridiculous Nine Princes in Amber kind of story, where it's a
right.
little bit ridiculous. But it's like, yeah, the audiobook for that is absolutely a 10 out of 10. I go out of my
And
way to listen to Ralph Pfister audiobooks now.
and so that's another thing that I find fascinating about audiobooks, though, is because you have another layer between the author and the reader, because now it's not a reader, it's a listener, but you have the narrator in there. And a good narrator can absolutely make the story.
Yeah. Oh,
So,
yeah.
I mean, exactly what you're talking about. But a bad narrator can kill a story too.
Yep.
I mean, if you have somebody who is reading the book in a very horrible way, then nobody's going to want to sit and listen to it. So,
Yep.
yeah.
And that's always something to an author or a publisher could concern themselves with. Studio 38, hey hey, because like sometimes I talk to people and it's like, what do you mean you don't have access to your cover? What do you mean you don't have access to the audiobook? What do you mean this? What do you mean that? Like, it's your story. They can't sell it. Like they're
Yeah.
just gonna sit on it. Yeah, they're just gonna sit on an art. They spent $400 on a piece of art, and then they're just going to sit on it forever because they can't use it for anything else because it's
Yep.
bespoke. And I don't mean to criticize anyone directly if you're listening, but it's like, to me, it's like you could, you know, do the old pub, trad pub thing, and then there's all this material that's just lost to the ether, even though it's absolutely a 10 out of 10. Or you could, like, find some way to work around it. Like, I think, as much as contract culture protects the right of the author, I think that there's some changes that need to be made to how it's worded and whatnot, so it's more flexible and doesn't like end with like covers disappearing, audiobooks disappearing, all this other stuff.
Yeah. I've occasionally gone to Anton's gallery pages just to see if he's featuring any of the Kursova stuff as a kind of promotion. I know he can't really market it the same way he can market some of the other stuff, but I never see any of it up there. And I
Yeah,
assume that has to do with, what rights he's already surrendered and things like that.
yeah, but it's like
And
mm,
I was going to say, and that's fine. I mean,
yeah,
I understand that. I'm not quite sure. I mean, it'd be a little weird to see the cover of my book schlepped in some other way that could possibly harm the sales of the book. You don't want that.
right.
Um,
But at the same time, it's like for some friends or whatever, it's just kind of like, now it's some very good covers were just kind of lost to the ether. Um,
well, maybe when copyright expires, they'll come back.
eh, and also it's an advertising thing. Like, to me, the author, the artist, the cover, like the cover artist, even the editor and the publisher are one advertising unit. The cover advertises for the book. It is the number one piece of advertising that matters for the book. It doesn't matter how good your Amazon ads are. You could have an in her prime Scarlett Johansson like holding up the book in a bikini, and it still wouldn't matter if it's some like esoteric, not early '90s CGI garbage. Like it's
Yeah, that is definitely the first thing that people see. It makes a visual impact. I'm a
Yeah.
little bit old school, and I know this is probably naive. I want to believe that, yeah, the cover can draw somebody in, and it might even make a sale. But if I want a second sale, I better have a good story.
Oh, absolutely. Like it, even though we are dancing around it, the story is what matters. And oh, by the way, Kursova says he's allowed to use the stuff for his portfolios and promotion, just not resell it to third parties, which makes a lot of sense. It's
Okay.
pretty nice. Um,
Yeah.
but like part of the reason why I'm very choosy with what authors I have on here, and I don't just like invite anyone who has a Twitter account that goes, "I'm an author," is because I'm always searching for that quality. The sort of superversive promise is that when you see someone we advertised, whether it's a Pulp Rev guy or a Gundam for Us or any of the other ones, we do, believe in the product and we do believe in the quality of this product. You're a proven author. Kursova is a proven publisher. Uh, you can certainly believe that this will be a quality product. Uh, and I appreciate you and Kursova and everyone else really going for it. The covers on Kursova are amazing. The stories within Kursova are amazing. The covers for Mongoose and Meerkat are amazing, and the stories that are going to be in the second sequel are going to be amazing, as they were good in the first one because I did read them when they were in the magazine, or some of them. I'm a little bit behind, but that's because I buy books for the prestige. But why don't you lead us out with the final word, sir?
Wow, I'm not quite sure what to say. We've seen to cover most bases. Like I said, the Kickstarter still has until the end of the month to run. For those people who haven't supported it yet, it'd be great if you kind of checked out the page and gave it some thought. Um, the stories are they were a lot of fun to write. I hope the people who are reading them are enjoying them as well. We are 2 volumes into it, and we definitely know where the story arc is going. So if you join us now, then you can be with us as we go towards the end.
Fantastic. And again, I will probably be picking up a trade paperback for myself. I will link it in the chat one last time so that people can find it. It's in the description, and I'm certain that if you follow around the names and the links and whatnot, any interested party can find Mongoose and Meerkat, the first volume, Passive Corminor, and more, in Kursova Magazine, and of course, so much more. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Mr. Breyfogle, for coming on and talking to me about your Kickstarter. And I hope you all,
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
you're welcome, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Goodbye.